so that leaves the other car open. So where does this? I didn't know that it was official that it was going to be a partnership with Chip Ganassi, McLaren and Chip Ganassi. I thought maybe it might have been Andretti, but neither here nor there. Is it just that they can't make a decision to get it done? Is it funding? What's this? What's the overall meaning of all of this?
Well, it's not a partnership between McLaren and Ganassi. These are the two guys that are fighting for him right now. McLaren, supposedly, according to reports, Paul Tracy, Marshall Product Racer, that they are offering upwards of $8 to $10 million next year for Scott Dixon. Ganassi, I don't know if they can offer that kind of money. That's the thing right now. There's an option out there that needs to either be taken up by Scott Dixon for 2019 or it needs to be turned down. And add to that, Michael Andretti has set an ultimatum, like we said last week, as to whether or not he wants to do this with McLaren or not, because there's a lot of different things that are being influenced. For instance, Indy-only rides. Stephen Wilson's seat for 2000, this year ahead, maybe Carlos Munoz if he can't find a ride again. So there are major repercussions as to what might happen here because you have that, and then if this falls through, you also have possibilities of a technical partnership involving possibly Harding Racing and Andretti. So this needs to come to a head here pretty soon here because, like I said, it's becoming a distraction for Scott Dixon potentially, and it's going to hold up the possibility of other transactions happening because everything right now centers around what's going to happen here, whether or not Alonso's coming and whether or not Dixon is going to make the move and essentially take a very decent payday to drive for a team that may or may not be solid in 2019.
Well, Scott Dixon wins the championship. Certainly he's in first place right now. If he wins the championship, doesn't that make it a little bit easier for somebody to find the money to bring him on board?
That's the thing, though. I mean, with the ultimatum set by Michael Andretti for this upcoming weekend at Pocono, I think hopefully it will be done before we are talking the final race of the championship. And it needs to get done because I think there's a lot of things that need to be looked ahead to because you can't wait till the last minute on these things. We've seen in the past where that's blown up in people's faces when you wait to the last few minutes on things. So ultimately, this needs to get done. It needs to come to a head, and I think it needs to be taken care of for all the parties so they can refocus their attention on trying to win a 2018 championship, well, at least in the case of Scott Dixon and Chip Ganassi it does. Now, obviously, Michael Andretti has focused on the championship with Alexander Rossi second in points. So the best thing that could happen right now is this comes to a head as soon as possible and we find out whether or not McLaren is or is not coming. I think that would be the best thing in general because the longer this lags around, the longer I think it's going to be a potential roadblock and a holdup for a lot of teams as far as getting ready for the next season.
Well, certainly in the top three anyway, you have three of the top stables. You've got Chip Ganassi Racing, you've got Andretti Racing, and, of course, you've got Penske Racing. And that is, of course, is Scott Dixon, Alexander Rossi, and Joseph Newgarden. Will Power, Ryan Hunter-Ray, Robert Wickens, and Robert Wickens, Simon Pattison, Graham Rahal, James Hinchcliffe, and Sebastian Bourdais all round out the top 10. Certainly a tight competition there. And certainly what I'm liking to see is Alexander Rossi gets a great win. I'm liking what James Hinchcliffe is doing this season. Joseph Newgarden also one that's in contention. In that top 10, is our champion in that top 10, or do you think that there might be a dark horse that can make a move late into the season?
I'd say right now the top 5 is where it's at, with the exception of maybe Will Power, who's just barely outside of it, as having a chance. Even with the double points in play for Sonoma, at this point I think the momentum's going to come from the teams that are further up on the list. I don't think Bourdais is one of those teams that can get there. And Pagenaud's been too hit or miss. I don't think he's going to be among the contenders. So I think ultimately you're looking at the big shots like Dixon, Newgarden, Rossi, Will Power as being the guys most likely that are going to challenge for the championship at this point of the season based on current momentum and their placement in the points. Because let's face it, I don't think, they try to create more opportunity by creating the double points at Sonoma, but I just don't think that's going to be enough of a window to allow more drivers into the championship, like, say, the way it is in the chase for the championship in NASCAR.
We're talking with Matthew Embry, our official IndyCar contributor. Matthew, we saw this week that Detroit secured a, well, I say Detroit, but it's the Grand Prix on Belle Isle, which is just outside of Detroit, but it's known as the Detroit race, Verizon IndyCar Series. Didn't they not reach a multi-year extension, or did I misread that this weekend on Twitter?
The race is now secure through 2021, so both IndyCar and IMSA will be back the week after the Indianapolis 500. Options still available for 2022 and 2023. The biggest thing right now is eventually, and let's not go too far into this because we've already delved into politics once. I don't need to delve into politics twice here with you. But I think ultimately you've got people in the Detroit area that are starting to, become negative about this event. And I don't know if it's just because of the way it affects traffic in the Belle Isle Park area and the casino area, or what the situation is, or it's just a nuisance. People aren't interested with all the outside traffic coming in. Whatever the reason is, there's just a major group of objection to this, and honestly, I can't see why that's the case, because without this race, does anyone really know about Belle Isle?
Well, absolutely, and you got to credit Roger Penske for really putting this together and really making it a hot spot. And the amount of money that's economically pumped into that area, the problem would be with Belle Isle. I have been up there before. The problem with that is, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. There's only one way on and one way off, and it's a very, very small, secluded area outside of the IndyCar race. Not much goes on there. So you do have your locals that say, hey, we don't like all the congestion, but they're also the same ones that say we don't like all the congestion, but we do like the economic impact that it brings. So, yeah, the unfortunate thing, Matt, about politics and sports, it's just become a reality, and there's just too much government that's trying to be involved in private business in a lot of ways, in a lot of different pockets, and that's would be one of the major reasons is because of the traffic backup. It's not unheard of to take 2.5 hours to get across the bridge and back into the Detroit area. Not so much if you're going through the Canadian way, but it's kind of a roundabout way to get back to the United States, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, I think it is the traffic, but it's good that they got that secured. Let's talk a little bit about some news that broke this week as well with Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart pulling a Danica Patrick, if you will. No pun intended, but he's been there, done that before. Why now does Tony Stewart say, hey, I want to run the 2019 Indianapolis 500?
Well, I think the pressure of all the fans saying, are you going to run Indy? Are you going to run Indy? He's starting to get it. And I remember Allister Jr., when he initially retired from the sport after 2005, that itch always was there, and then he eventually had the urge to scratch it. And I think that's what you're seeing with Tony Stewart. The question in my mind, though, is he going to find a competitive ride? I mean, some people have been talking about ECR. ECR is a limited budget team here, Tom, and that would mean a 4-car entry at Indy next year, considering they're running 2 full-time cars and then an extra car for Ed Carpenter at Indy next year as part of their new format. So that doesn't seem like an option. Maybe Ganassi, if you could convince him that running an extra car would be a good idea, even though that's something he hasn't been keen about. And already Penske's running 4 cars. I don't know why they go to 5, because the last time they ran 5, it was a disaster for them the previous year when they struggled in qualifying and in the race itself. So the situation is, I don't know. Even if he does get something done here, I don't think he's going to be able to find a competitive team. So I don't know if it is worthwhile just being a mid-pack runner since, like, say, when Jacques Villeneuve came back a few years ago and was a non-factor.
Right, absolutely, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I did want to get your thoughts because I know you're right up there in Notre Dame country. You're more than welcome to stick around for our NASCAR segment, and in the second hour we're going to get deep into this NFL and fantasy football talk. So, honestly, Matthew, you can stay as long as you want. And in all fairness to you, you're entitled to your opinion. I was just trying to say that, unfortunately, Donald Trump is a polarizing figure. But I just say you can't put all the blame on Donald Trump if the NFL goes away or dissipates or loses money. You can't blame Donald Trump for that because he's not buying tickets, he's not buying merchandise, he's not going to games. So all he's doing is talking. So if he has that much influence over people, it's because people are passionate about that. So it's the fans that are being turned against it. And I think as long as the media keep fanning it, keep fanning the fuel, well, yeah, Donald Trump's going to jump in there and do his own fanning too, as far as that goes. But let's talk a little bit about Notre Dame. Obviously, coming up on September 1st is opening weekend. We'll have our 2-hour nothing but college football talk show on September 1st. Matt, you're certainly more than welcome to join us. Obviously, coming up on August 22nd, the debut, or not debut, but the bringing back of Breaking Rank. Our executive producer, Rick-Riggin, will be the host of that. Rick will be joining us here in the second hour. So let's talk a little bit about that big game, Michigan, Notre Dame. One of the games, though, that I'm looking at going forward, maybe it's just because it's never happened, maybe because it's two Indiana teams, but I'm really excited to see the Ball State Notre Dame games. Talk with me a little bit about coming up here on September 1st, Michigan, Notre Dame. What are some of the things you're seeing happening in Notre Dame camp? How are they getting ready for this big game? How are they getting ready for the opening season of 2018 Notre Dame football?
Well, I think right now the few positions I had questions about last week, and we talked about this when Rick-Riggin was in, was quarterback position. I think it's clear that Brandon Wimbush is the guy. Then you have the running back position. It looks like Tony Jones Jr. is going to be the man for the Michigan game. It's starting to look more and more likely like Dexter Williams' situations, whatever they are, and we don't know what they are not going to be taken care of before the Michigan game, so he's out of play. And then, of course, you've had the opportunities at wide receivers. One guy that we didn't talk about, we obviously talked about Chase Claypool. We talked about Miles Boykin. Another guy I think that really could be an X factor in that Michigan game is their slot receiver, Chris Fink. He is the type of guy, for instance, do you remember the former Iowa Hawkeye, the former NFL player Tim Dwight, for instance?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do.
He reminds me a lot of Tim Dwight. And if he could show that same aggression up the middle, he could be an X factor that could open up the field for a Chase Claypool, a Miles Boykin, maybe even a Cole Kmet at the tight end spot or an Alizé Mack at the tight end spot. If he has a big game in that opener against Michigan, Notre Dame has a very good chance to win it.
So let's, real quickly, just keep it on the college football schedule because I know it was a big story last week. We talked it to death. It's been talked about, but Urban Meyer is still kind of a story. There's still those people that are on the fence that say he's going to get suspended, and then he'll be back in time for regular teams that doesn't matter, that matter, I guess. And then there's the say that he'll get fired. Courtney, at the Ohio State University never once spoke to her about domestic violence. So if, in fact, what Urban Meyer is saying is true, that he did what he was supposed to do, but then he just basically turned a blind eye, there is a problem or a breakdown with Ohio State if they didn't even once talk to Courtney Smith about domestic violence. Are you there, man?
I think the word fire has kind of died out just a little bit, and that's the key thing here. So I think more suspension, and the thing is, it sounds like it's a slap on the wrist. And I know our colleague Rick-Riggin is not going to be happy hearing that because I know he was adamant that a termination should be considered for this. But the fact of the matter is there just isn't enough out there, I think, to say and willfully tie what Zach Smith did to Urban Meyer. That's the problem here. And because remember how the thing is in a court of law, Tom, as much as it's tough saying, innocent until proven guilty. And there just isn't enough evidence out there to say that definitively Urban Meyer turned a blind eye to this. Now, did he do that? Well, that's probably something we're never going to know because of, covering up information and all that stuff and what doesn't get leaked and all that. So, unfortunately, if you were to put this in a court of law, I don't think there's enough to say that this is a terminationable defense. Now, maybe minor suspension, maybe, But like I said, it's going to be in games where it's not going to influence anything as far as Ohio State, so you're still going to have the naysayers there. But you look at the situation right now, and I've looked through it multiple times, Tom, and again, I know Rick won't agree with